Marcus Thorne had learned 3 fundamental rules during his tenure as a security liaison for interstellar diplomatic events. Never eat anything that glows in the dark. Always assume the translator is working at 70% accuracy. And under no circumstances should you touch alien dignitaries without a written invitation and preferably a legal waiver. Unfortunately, nobody had mentioned that last rule should especially apply when said dignitaries appeared to be falling over during live broadcasts to 17 different star systems. The Unity Summit's opening ceremony was proceeding exactly according to the meticulously planned schedule that Marcus had memorized down to the second. Princess Zaralyn of the Ethereal Dominion stood at the center of the crystalline amphitheater, her translucent skin shifting through patterns of blue and silver that his briefing materials had described as ceremonial reverence displays. She was tall, elegant, and moved with the kind of fluid grace that suggested her species had evolved in environments where falling down simply wasn't an option, which made it all the more alarming when she began to sway during the ritual's climactic moment. Marcus watched from his position near the human delegation as the princess raised her arms in the traditional gesture of cosmic unity, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through configurations that painted the crystalline walls in shifting aurora displays. The assembled delegates from across the galaxy maintained respectful silence, their various forms of attention focused on what was supposed to be a moment of unprecedented interspecies harmony. That's when Princess Zaralyn's graceful composure wavered. It was subtle at first, a slight tremor in her outstretched arms, a momentary disruption in her luminescent patterns. But Marcus's security training had taught him to notice the subtle signs that preceded diplomatic disasters, and the princess's increasing instability triggered every alarm bell in his enhanced situational awareness. "She's going to fall," he murmured into his calm, but the ceremonial silence protocols meant his transmission was automatically blocked. Around him, the other human delegates remained focused on the ritual's symbolic significance, oblivious to what Marcus's trained eye could see developing. The princess swayed more noticeably, her bioluminescent displays flickering with what looked like distress patterns. The crystalline amphitheater itself seemed to respond to her emotional state, its walls pulsing with increasingly chaotic energy that made the assembled delegates shift uncomfortably in their various forms of seating. Marcus made the kind of split-second decision that had kept him alive through 3 years of interstellar diplomatic postings. He moved. The distance between his position and the ceremonial platform was perhaps 20 feet, but Marcus covered it with the efficient stride of someone accustomed to preventing incidents before they became international crises. Princess Zaralyn's legs buckled just as he reached her, and his hand instinctively moved to steady her shoulder. The moment his palm made contact with her luminescent skin, the universe decided to remind Marcus why his job came with hazard pay. The princess froze under his touch, as if he'd activated some kind of biological stasis field. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted immediately from ceremonial reverence to what Marcus's crash course in ethereal body language helpfully identified as existential horror mixed with social catastrophe. The crystalline walls of the amphitheater began resonating with harmonics that sounded like a chorus of wind chimes having an argument with a theremin. Then the screaming started. The ethereal delegation erupted in synchronized vocalizations that Marcus's translator struggled to process, cycling through descriptors like violation, contamination, and ritual predation with increasing urgency. The princess herself remained motionless beneath his steadying hand, her silver eyes wide with what looked like a combination of shock and something approaching panic. "Oh," Marcus said quietly, his security training finally catching up with the cultural significance of what he'd just done. "This is bad, isn't it?" Princess Zaralyn's bioluminescent patterns flickered through rapid configurations that painted her emotional state across every crystalline surface in the amphitheater. When she finally spoke, Her voice carried harmonics that made the walls themselves seem to recoil. "Human," she said, and the way she pronounced the word suggested it had suddenly become synonymous with several concepts that definitely weren't covered in basic diplomatic protocol. "Remove your hand." "No." Marcus lifted his palm away from her shoulder as if it had suddenly caught fire, which, given the way her skin was now pulsing with agitated energy patterns, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The damage, however, was already done. Every delegate in the amphitheater was staring at them with expressions ranging from fascination to horror, while the ethereal guards, tall figures whose faces remained hidden behind masks that shifted like liquid mercury, began moving toward the ceremonial platform with predatory intent. "I was trying to prevent you from falling," Marcus said, which sounded reasonable in his head, but apparently translated into something significantly more problematic, based on the way the princess's luminescent displays intensified. "You have committed ritual violation during sacred ceremony," she announced, her voice now carrying the kind of formal authority that suggested this conversation was about to become significantly more official than Marcus would have preferred. Under the laws of the ethereal dominion, unsolicited physical contact from a male of any species during ceremonial observance constitutes predatory contamination. Marcus blinked several times, processing this information through the growing realization that his helpful gesture had just been classified as something between assault and sacrilege. Predatory contamination. "The punishment," Princess Zaralyn continued, her bioluminescent patterns now cycling through configurations that his translator identified as formal denunciation protocols, "is purification through execution at dawn." The crystalline amphitheater erupted into chaos that would have been impressive if Marcus hadn't been at the center of it. Delegates from 17 different star systems began talking, shrieking, harmonizing, and in one case apparently molting in what his translator optimistically labeled as expressions of diplomatic concern. The ethereal delegation had arranged themselves in a formation that looked suspiciously like a tribunal, their bioluminescent display synchronized in patterns that painted accusations across every reflective surface. "Execution at dawn," Marcus repeated, testing the words to see if they sounded less apocalyptic the second time. They didn't. "That seems like a significant escalation from cultural misunderstanding to capital punishment. Is there perhaps a middle ground we could explore? Community service. A strongly worded letter of apology." Princess Zaralyn's luminescent patterns flickered through configurations that suggested his attempts at humor were not improving his situation. "The contamination is absolute," she declared, though Marcus noticed her biodisplays carried undertones his translator struggled to interpret. "Sacred ritual has been violated by predatory contact. Purification requires the removal of the contaminating element." The ethereal High Advocate stepped forward, his mask displaying shifting geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the crystalline walls resonate with ominous authority. "The human has demonstrated predatory intent during the most sacred of our observances. The law is clear. Dawn purification will cleanse the contamination and restore ceremonial sanctity." Marcus glanced toward the human delegation, hoping to see Ambassador Chen or Cultural Liaison Rivera preparing some kind of diplomatic intervention. Instead, he found them engaged in what appeared to be damage control calculations, their expressions suggesting they were already composing the reports that would explain how one of their security personnel had accidentally committed what amounted to interstellar assault during live broadcast. "Your Honor," Marcus said, addressing the High Advocate with what he hoped was appropriate respect, "I understand this looks bad, but I genuinely was trying to prevent Her Highness from falling. Where I come from, that's considered helpful rather than predatory. Cultural differences, right? Maybe we could arrange some kind of sensitivity training instead of, the dawn execution thing." The High Advocate's mask patterns shifted to configurations that suggested Marcus had just made everything significantly worse. The human demonstrates continued predatory behavior through attempts to justify contamination. This confirms the necessity of immediate purification. Princess Zarelyn stood perfectly still throughout this exchange, her bioluminescent displays cycling through patterns so complex that Marcus's translator gave up and simply labeled them as profound internal conflict. When she finally spoke, her voice carried undertones that seemed to surprise even her own delegation. "The violation occurred," she said carefully, "but the predatory intent remains questionable." The High Advocate's mask pattern stuttered with what looked like confusion. "Your Highness, the law does not require intent. Contact during sacred ritual by male of foreign species constitutes contamination regardless of motivation." "I understand the law, High Advocate," the princess replied, and her luminescent patterns shifted to display what Marcus's cultural briefings had described as polite disagreement with superior authority, which was apparently a very dangerous social position for alien royalty. However, the human's behavior preceding contact suggests reflexive response rather than calculated predation. Marcus felt a flutter of hope, which was immediately crushed when the High Advocate's mask displayed patterns that his translator identified as absolute legal certainty. "Motivation is irrelevant to contamination, Your Highness. The purification must proceed as prescribed by ancient law. The human dies at dawn, and the contamination dies with him." The assembled delegates buzzed with translations, harmonizations, and what sounded like several different species versions of nervous laughter. Marcus realized that his diplomatic incident had evolved into an interstellar crisis with himself as the unwilling centerpiece. "Well," he said, looking around the amphitheater at faces ranging from sympathetic to bloodthirsty, "this is definitely going on my performance review. Though I suppose accidentally triggered diplomatic crisis through helpfulness is at least original." Princess Zarelyn's bioluminescent displays flickered through a rapid sequence that caught Marcus's attention. Her patterns were cycling through configurations that seemed almost familiar, not in the way of his cultural training, but in some deeper recognition that made his security instincts twitch with the sensation that something important was happening just outside his understanding. "High Advocate," the princess said suddenly, her voice carrying new harmonics that made every ethereal in the amphitheater straighten with apparent surprise, "I invoke the right of deepest inquiry." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the crystalline walls adjusting their resonance frequencies. The High Advocate's mask went completely static, displaying patterns that looked like a computer trying to process information it wasn't equipped to handle. "Your Highness," the High Advocate said carefully, "the right of deepest inquiry has not been invoked in living memory. The ancient protocols require—" "I am aware of the protocols," Princess Zarelyn interrupted, her luminescent patterns now displaying what looked like royal authority mixed with desperate determination. "As the violated party, I claim the right to investigate the circumstances of contamination before purification is enacted. I bind myself and the accused to joint inquiry until truth is established or dawn arrives." Marcus felt something shift in the air around him, a sensation like being wrapped in warm electricity that seemed to connect him directly to the princess's emotional state. Through this unexpected link, he could suddenly sense her fear, her determination, and underneath it all, a growing suspicion that neither of them was supposed to survive the next 12 hours. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "what exactly did you just do?" Her silver eyes met his, and through their new connection, he felt her response before she spoke it aloud. "I bought us time to figure out who wants us both dead." The private chambers where Marcus and Princess Zarelyn were escorted for their joint inquiry looked like someone had decided to cross a luxury hotel suite with a high-security laboratory. Crystalline walls provided privacy while allowing the ceremony energy fields that bound them to function properly, creating an environment that was simultaneously elegant and unsettlingly intimate. "So," Marcus said, settling into what appeared to be a chair designed for someone with a significantly different skeletal structure, "when you said joint inquiry, I was picturing more of a conference room situation. Maybe some depositions, a few witnesses, possibly some of those little sandwiches they serve at diplomatic functions. This feels more like." He gestured at the energy fields that hummed between them, creating visible connections that pulsed with their synchronized heartbeats. House arrest for two. Princess Zerlin's bioluminescent patterns shifted through what Marcus was learning to recognize as her version of dry humor. The right of deepest inquiry requires complete honesty between the bound parties. The ceremonial fields ensure that neither of us can lie to the other, either deliberately or through self-deception. "Fantastic," Marcus muttered, then immediately felt the princess's awareness of his genuine anxiety about the arrangement. "Sorry, this is just new territory for me. Most of my security training focused on preventing diplomatic incidents, not investigating them while psychically linked to alien royalty." Through their connection, he sensed Zerlin's amusement mixed with something that felt like relief. "Your honesty is refreshing, Marcus Thorne. Most beings in your situation would attempt to maintain diplomatic facades even when facing execution. Well, seeing as the diplomatic facade is what got me into this mess, maybe honesty is worth trying." Marcus found himself relaxing despite their circumstances, the enforced truthfulness somehow making conversation easier rather than more difficult. "Though I have to ask, if you suspected something was wrong with the whole situation, why invoke an ancient legal procedure instead of just saying so?" Zerlin's luminescent patterns dimmed with what felt like frustration. "Because my suspicions involve members of my own court, and accusations without absolute proof would be considered treason. The right of deepest inquiry allows us to investigate without formally accusing anyone until we have evidence." Marcus nodded, his security training engaging with the political complexities. "So someone set this up. The question is whether they wanted me dead, you compromised, or both of us out of the way." "My thoughts exactly." The princess moved closer and Marcus felt their ceremonial connection strengthen, allowing him to sense her memories more clearly. "I've been experiencing incidents for the past several weeks. Small disruptions, minor protocol violations, social pressures that seemed designed to undermine my position." Through their link, Marcus experienced flashes of Zerlin's recent experiences. Subtle manipulations during court functions, carefully orchestrated social situations that cast doubt on her judgment, and a growing sense that someone was positioning her for a significant fall from grace. And today's ceremony was the perfect opportunity, Marcus realized. Get me positioned where I'd react instinctively to your distress, knowing that human reflexes would override cultural sensitivity. "But how did they know you would react that way?" Zerlin asked. "Your psychological profile would have been analyzed before your assignment to this posting. Someone understood your behavioral patterns well enough to predict your response." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crystalline chamber's temperature. That level of analysis requires access to classified human psychological profiles. We're not talking about casual espionage here. They spent the next several hours combining Marcus's security expertise with Zerlin's understanding of ethereal court politics, using their enforced honesty to piece together a conspiracy that reached disturbing levels of coordination between human and ethereal elements. The investigation revealed patterns of manipulation that suggested someone had been planning this incident for months, carefully positioning all the necessary elements to create an unavoidable diplomatic crisis. "The positioning during the ceremony wasn't random," Marcus said, reviewing the security footage through the chamber's analysis systems. Look at these sight lines. I was placed exactly where I'd have the clearest view of your distress and the most direct path to reach you. Zaralyn's patterns flickered with growing anger as she accessed her own memories of the ceremony preparations. And my moment of instability wasn't natural. I was given a ceremonial elixir that should have enhanced my bioluminescent displays, but I can feel now that it contained something else. Something designed to create precisely the kind of weakness you observed. So we have coordination between whoever arranged my positioning and whoever drugged your ceremonial drink, Marcus said. That's conspiracy involving both human and ethereal elements. Through their connection, he felt Zaralyn's realization hit her like a physical blow. High Advocate Morthes, she whispered. He oversaw both the ceremonial preparations and the diplomatic seating arrangements. He had access to everything needed to orchestrate this. Marcus processed this through his security training, considering the political implications. But what's his endgame? Your execution would destabilize ethereal leadership, and mine would give human hardliners justification for aggressive policies. Unless that's exactly what he wants, Zaralyn finished. A crisis that benefits both ethereal separatists and human supremacists. Two factions that officially oppose each other but share a common interest in ending peaceful cooperation. The realization sent chills through both of them via their connection. They weren't just facing execution. They were facing a conspiracy designed to ignite the kind of interstellar conflict that would devastate both their peoples. We have perhaps 3 hours until dawn, Zaralyn said, her luminescent patterns displaying grim determination. We need proof that will convince both our peoples that they're being manipulated into war. Marcus grinned, and through their link, she felt his surge of tactical excitement. Your Highness, I think it's time we turned this investigation into a counterintelligence operation. But I should warn you, my methods tend to be significantly less diplomatic than what you're probably used to. Given that diplomacy nearly got us both killed, Zaralyn replied, her own patterns brightening with something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. I think less diplomatic might be exactly what we need. Dawn approached the crystalline amphitheater with the inexorable certainty of a cosmic deadline, painting the sky in colors that Marcus found either beautiful or ominous, depending on whether he focused on the sunrise or the execution scheduled to accompany it. He and Princess Zaralyn stood before an emergency assembly of the combined diplomatic corps, their ceremonial binding still active and broadcasting their emotional states to anyone capable of reading bioluminescent displays. Honored delegates, Zaralyn began, her voice carrying harmonics of royal authority enhanced by 3 hours of intensive investigation and what Marcus privately thought of as justified outrage. We stand before you not as accused and accuser, but as joint witnesses to a conspiracy that threatens the foundation of interstellar cooperation. High Advocate Morthes maintained his position at the center of the ethereal delegation, his shifting mask displaying patterns of skeptical concern that would have been convincing if Marcus and Zaralyn hadn't spent the pre-dawn hours uncovering his communications with human supremacist factions. The evidence was damning, but presenting it without triggering the very war, the conspiracy was designed to create required diplomatic finesse that pushed Marcus's training to its limits. The incident during yesterday's ceremony was not spontaneous, Marcus announced, letting his voice carry the confidence of someone who had spent years preventing disasters rather than causing them. Physical evidence shows deliberate manipulation of both ceremonial preparations and security positioning, designed to create an unavoidable cultural violation. Through their link, he felt Zaralyn's support and shared determination as she activated the chamber's holographic display systems. The assembled delegates watched as security footage revealed the subtle manipulations that had made the incident inevitable. Marcus's placement in the optimal position to observe and react to the princess's distress, the timing of the ceremonial elixir that had induced her weakness, and the carefully orchestrated removal of other security personnel who might have reacted first. The conspiracy, Zaralin continued, involved coordination between ethereal separatists seeking to end human cooperation and human factions seeking justification for aggressive expansion policies. Both groups benefit from the interstellar conflict that would result from either my execution or Marcus's escape. Morthus's mask pattern stuttered with what looked like diplomatic outrage. These accusations are desperate fabrications designed to avoid lawful punishment. The human's violation of sacred ceremony cannot be dismissed through conspiracy theories. You're absolutely right, Marcus said, and his agreement sent surprise rippling through the assembled delegates. The violation occurred exactly as prescribed by law. The question is who prescribed it. The holographic display shifted to show communication logs that had taken considerable effort to decrypt, revealing months of coordination between Morthus and a human faction led by someone, identified only as Colonial Advocate. The messages detailed plans to engineer a cultural incident that would either eliminate progressive leadership on both sides or provide justification for military action. High Advocate Morthus, Zaralin said, her bioluminescent patterns displaying the kind of royal displeasure that made crystalline walls resonate with ominous harmonics. Do you deny coordinating with human extremists to engineer yesterday's incident? Morthus's mask went completely static for several seconds before cycling through patterns that Marcus's enhanced understanding recognized as legal deflection. Communications with human elements were part of standard diplomatic intelligence gathering. Any implications beyond? Oh, cut the diplomatic bullshit, Marcus interrupted, earning startled reactions from delegates who hadn't expected security personnel to abandon protocol quite so thoroughly. We have your communications discussing the specific timing of the ceremonial drugging and my positioning. We have transfer records showing payments to your supporters and coordination with human agents. The only question left is whether you're going to confess or make us present every piece of evidence, while the people you were trying to manipulate figure out exactly how close they came to being played into a war nobody actually wanted. The silence that followed was broken by Princess Zaralin's bioluminescent laughter, a sound that painted the crystalline walls in patterns of genuine amusement mixed with grim satisfaction. I think I'm beginning to understand why your diplomatic success rate is so high, Marcus. There's something refreshing about complete honesty in political situations. Through their bond, Marcus felt her decision before she announced it to the assembly. I invoke royal prerogative to commute the contamination sentence. The violation was engineered by enemies of both our peoples, and executing the unwilling instrument of their conspiracy serves only their interests. The ethereal delegation erupted in harmonized discussions that made the chamber sound like a convention of musical instruments having a heated debate about tuning. The human delegates looked between relief and confusion, while representatives from other species seemed primarily focused on not getting involved in what was clearly about to become a very complicated legal situation. High Advocate Morthus made one final desperate gambit, activating personal shield generators and producing weapons that definitely weren't standard diplomatic equipment. The contamination cannot be allowed to spread, he declared, his mask now displaying patterns of fanatical determination. If legal purification fails, direct action must suffice. And that, Marcus said, drawing his own sidearm with the casual competence of someone who had been expecting this exact situation, is what we call confession through attempted murder. Your Highness, might I suggest we conclude this investigation by demonstrating the kind of cooperation our enemies were so eager to prevent. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of what happened when security training met royal authority in perfect synchronization. Marcus's tactical expertise combined with Zarolin's understanding of the chamber's crystalline resonance systems to create a coordinated response that neutralized Morthes's weapons, while providing the kind of dramatic conclusion that ensured every delegate present would remember exactly who had tried to manipulate them into war. 6 months later, Marcus stood beside Princess Zarolin in the same crystalline amphitheater, though this time the ceremony involved significantly less potential for execution and considerably more celebration of the new cooperative security protocols they had developed together. Their ceremonial binding had evolved into something approaching partnership, both professional and personal, that neither of them had expected but both had come to value. So, Marcus said, watching the assembled delegates celebrate the formal establishment of the joint security initiative with considerably more enthusiasm than they'd shown for his near execution. Any regrets about invoking that ancient legal procedure instead of just letting them execute me at dawn? Through their permanent link, established by mutual choice rather than legal necessity, he felt Zarolin's amusement mixed with deeper contentment. Only that it took a conspiracy to murder us both before we realized how well we worked together. Though I suppose that's more dramatic than most diplomatic partnerships begin. Your Highness, Marcus replied, grinning as bioluminescent patterns painted their shared satisfaction across the crystalline walls. I think dramatic beginnings might be our specialty. The ceremony concluded with significantly less threat of execution than their first meeting, and as delegates from across the galaxy celebrated the kind of cooperation that had nearly been destroyed by those who claimed to represent their interests, Marcus reflected that sometimes the best diplomatic solutions came from abandoning diplomacy entirely in favor of simple honesty about what people actually wanted: peace, cooperation, and the occasional opportunity to make inappropriate jokes while preventing interstellar wars.